Herzliche Grüße.
A very warm welcome from the state representation of Hesse in Brussels on a new event of our series Crisis Talks. Today's event is about Conference on the Future of Europe, Participation in Times of Crisis. And today's date has been well chosen since this Conference on the Future of Europe is going to come to an end with a report tomorrow, and this is what we're going to discuss today. My name is Matthias Kolb. I work for the Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper, and I am very glad to be able to host the event today. Even if it wasn't a problem for me to fill this event with my own questions. This is not really the sense of the event, but we would like to hear from you. Please contact us with any questions or remarks you may have. You can call us on +32 0472 030181, or you can send an email through streamline at lv-brüssel.hessen.de.
Wir beginnen jetzt.
And we are going to start with a few introductory words from Lucia Puttrich, the Minister for European and Federal Affairs of the State of Hessen.
Sehr geehrte Damen und
Dear ladies and gentlemen, I warmly welcome you to our crisis talk of today from the state representation of Hessen, and I would like to thank our partners of Leibniz Research Network and the Goethe University Frankfurt for organizing the event series together with us. Today's event is about nothing else but the future of Europe. The Conference on the Future of Europe has been a big experiment. The European institutions, for the first time in history, have created a format of a Europe-wide debate with citizens of Europe on the design of Europe of the future. And I am a member of this conference. The aim of this conference is to find common answers on the many challenges that Europe is facing today. But can this actually succeed in such a participatory event? Just before the end of the event, we actually have to draw different conclusions. The central element of the conference of citizens' involvement was certainly an event that managed to reach a number of citizens to be able to discuss the future of Europe. Also, the format of hosting the event online made it possible for many citizens to get involved. But on the other hand, we also have to acknowledge that not that many people got involved. The big expectations that were linked to this conference were not able to be achieved so far. Ladies and gentlemen, and this actually is contradictory to the will and the wish of many citizens to actually further get involved in European politics. Therefore, we shouldn't be discouraged by the low participation level of citizens, but I think we should encourage more people to get involved. And this shouldn't be a replacement for democratic processes, but as a support in order to improve communication in terms of politics. How far this citizens' involvement can go and where are its limitations, this is what we are going to discuss today in our crisis talk. Ladies and gentlemen, from today, the final plenary meeting of the conference will be held and the final report is going to be handed over to the old and new re-elected French president in Strasbourg on the 9th of May. But only once the EU institutions have decided whether and how far they are going to implement these recommendations from the Conference on Europe, we are going to see whether this conference has actually shaped the EU differently. We previously had the corona pandemic, and now we have to deal with the terrible Ukraine war. These were the challenges of Europe that have also shaped these discussions in the conference on the future of Europe. It is now about thinking how we can further strengthen the EU on tackling climate change in the area of digitalization, for example. If we can show a positive sign from this conference, it is that the great majority of people actually sees their future in the Europe. And this is the best signal that we could have wished for from this conference. And therefore, this message should shape our further actions. I wish you all an interesting discussion and event. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. And we just actually mentioned it, that the fact that Crisis Talk has been co-organized with the Leibniz Research Network, and therefore we are going to hear from Mr. Kroll from Leibniz Research Network. Dear guests, both here in the room and online, I am pleased to be able to welcome you as well to this event, and therefore I would also like to thank our partners. We are very pleased to be able to talk on today's event, and thank you to the Research Network Normative Orders at Goethe University. Multiple crises don't actually lose their importance. We can be sure that with regard to climate changes, we can actually see further crises. We are in the midst of an acute crisis, the Ukraine war, that is threatening the European peace order, that has a lot of impact on food security, energy security, and perhaps we are in the phase of a post-crisis with regard to the pandemic, but we don't yet know what is going to happen in autumn. And what we know is that the trust in politics has been lost and has to be regained. And this is what we're going to talk about today. How can we regain trust through participation? And I am therefore very pleased that we can welcome somebody from a new project, Contrast, living together under conditions in crises. So how can we win back trust in times of crisis that we have experienced? And Sarah Brockmeier is exactly looking at these topics, and today she's going to just discuss the Conference on the Future of Europe with us. It is about supporting trust with participation, and obviously we are going to draw conclusions from the Conference on the Future of Europe, and it is going to be interesting what the result is going to look like. 4,000 contributions that had been handed in through the platform, 6,000 events that were hosted over last year, and we are going to have a look at the ranking. What are the topics that were mostly discussed? Democracy was one of them, and climate changes. Those two topics were the two topics that were mostly discussed over the course of the conference. What we don't know is that the reports that haven't been published yet, that we have seen, is the topic of EU in the world. This is on position 7. Therefore, we haven't yet seen an impact from the Ukraine war. Obviously, European unity, defense politics, this is obviously something that perhaps will further be discussed. We are at a turning point in Europe, and therefore, for me, it is also important to see what is the Russia effect going to look like in this conference on the future of Europe. And at the end, it is going to be about implementing all of these recommendations to avoid any disappointments to the fact that any recommendations may not be implemented. I think we have to further pursue an active participation of citizens, because since only that way Europe, the European Union, can become more resilient. And this is what we're going to discuss today. Yes, thank you. And we have just heard that we are going to hear the keynote speech of Ms. Brockmeier. The floor is yours. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to today's event. Has the conference on the future of Europe been a success? Is this also a possible model for the future? These were the questions that were already raised today. And I'm going to tell you now that I cannot answer these questions since, as we have already heard, in comparison to previous dialogues, this has been a very comprehensive process, a multi-layer process with a lot of different events, online platforms, plenary meetings, and so on. But the success and the impact of the conference cannot yet be evaluated since it hasn't come to an end yet. And obviously this weekend's events are going to be very interesting, but we don't yet know what is going to happen with the results. Therefore, I am going to focus on the success criteria of this kind of citizens dialogue and what has the Conference on the Future of Europe done in that regard. First of all, the process design, the participation, the selection of participants. First of all, process design from research and also from practice. This is the criteria that is perhaps the most important in order to have good participation levels, to have a very clear process and a very clear management. We need a clear understanding of who is supposed to be involved, what are the questions being raised, and what are the questions that can be raised towards the participants. This has to be cleared up in the beginning, and it is also important that it is very clear from the very beginning what is going to happen with the results and what kind of feedbacks are citizens going to receive at the end of the event. And this doesn't only require the organization to manage this input, it is also important for them to want to do so. It is important for them to have the capacity to do so. This, unfortunately, is not always guaranteed. And all these things that I've just mentioned are very important, since research has shown us that participants can be disappointed following this event, and this is going to lead to the fact that they will be further disappointed than if they hadn't even participated in it. As I mentioned, we cannot evaluate the process yet since it hasn't come to an end. But we can say that it was a huge challenge, a very complex process with all of these 4 layers and 3 institutions that organized the event. And these institutions are in itself very complex organizations. We don't yet know how the results are going to be dealt with. And it is very normal for the European Union to have such a complex process in such a format. Communication about what is going to happen with the results, this has also been rather vague, and the process has been rather short. Now I have just talked about the process, and now I'm going to discuss also the participants and topics that were discussed. First of all, the participants. It is necessary that the right participants are being selected. Well, If, for example, we choose self-election, the fact that participants can actually apply themselves, it is usually the case that those are going to participate who already have a basic interest in this topic, which means that it is less representative, which also means that it is less cost intensive. In the case of the Conference on the Future of Europe, this actually has been achieved rather well in the sense that people were randomly selected, even if from first evaluations we can see that, again, people with rather higher qualifications have built the majority of those participating in the conference. What is not very clear to me from the outside is the selection of national representatives in the plenary meetings. Those were not only so-called normal people, ordinary people, but in some cases also previous ministers, for example, and therefore I am not sure about the fact who actually had something to say in the plenary, who actually made sure that everybody had a right to speak. And in terms of the selection of participants, I noticed that only in some countries there were actually national forums, and this obviously could lead to the fact that the voices from some countries are being overrepresented. Thirdly, on the topics and the questions that were raised, this is all it. With that regard, it is always important to remember that there is a trade-off. And this is what we saw. If the topic with these citizens' dialogues, if we choose very open and a lot of topics, for example, there was one EU panel on the topics of climate change, the EU and health. This means that citizens are given the choice that they can discuss what they want. But if the topics are selected in a different way, it means that specific topics can be discussed, and it is easier to evaluate afterwards whether these recommendations are being implemented. In the Conference on the Future of Europe, one result of the interim report was that the selection of topics was too wide and that a lot of time had to be taken up in order to specify topics and to have concrete debates. Lastly, is the Conference on the Future of Europe a model fit for the future? And I actually have a twofold answer to that. First of all, yes, on the one hand, citizens' dialogues on the European Union have a big future. And I do think that the process has shown that the mix between online formats and in-person dialogues is a very good one. We had very enthusiastic participants who liked to discuss these topics. I think we are going to keep this kind of format, but at the same time, I think we have to be mindful of not overloading these events. It is important to provide clear processes with less layers, less actors, so that it is very clear to everybody what is going to happen with the results afterwards. One idea that actors from civil society have also talked about again and again is that we also have to link these events to political processes. I could actually talk a lot more on these topics, but I'm going to look forward to this discussion now. Thank you, Ms. Brockmeier. We are going to start the discussion now. I'm going to ask Professor Sgueo to take a seat, and whilst he is walking towards us, I'm going to introduce him. We have Mr. Gianluca Sgueo. He is a social researcher, and he is a senior associate fellow and professor at the Brussels School of Governance, and he is also a member of the digital transformation team in Italy, and he has a lot of experience in the topic, and I'm going to look forward to the discussion with him. First of all, I'm going to start with Stefanie Hartung. She is joining us from Frankfurt, and she is a national citizens representative at the Conference on the Future of Europe. Therefore, she can actually talk to us about what happened during the debates. And she's also a member of Pulse of Europe, where she is a member of the board. I would like to ask you, Ms. Hartung, to tell us what you have seen during these debates. What did you think went well? What did you think didn't go that well? And perhaps you can tell us something from these debates, since you participated yourself. Yes, thank you again for inviting me today, and good afternoon from Hessen to Brussels. Well, first of all, I would like to use the term experiment that the minister used as well. And there is also always some degree of uncertainty involved. We have seen a very brave step from Brussels to open doors to allow for citizens' participation, and I can see that these doors will not be closed. And I would like to actually start out with a positive message. There are a number of points of critique, but at the same time we had a number of rather surprising and positive moments. Yes, of course, some of the processes and structures should have been accompanied to a better extent, but what I actually thought was very interesting was the possibility of politicians discussing with citizens. This hasn't happened before, and I think we needed a certain amount of time to actually find our role in the process. It would have been more ideal to have hosts, since at the beginning we had a number of rather different ideas, but we have actually been in this process for quite some time, since June last year, when the first plenary meeting happened, and a lot has changed in the meantime. In the meantime, we have 178 citizens' recommendations from those 4 citizens' forums, plus a number of national recommendations. Ms. Brockmeier has said that unfortunately not all of these 27 member states have actually had these national citizens' dialogues. It has been a chance, a possibility, but obviously we do have those believing in the process, but we also have those who don't believe in the process. And therefore, we only had some member states who had those national citizens' forums. But the national recommendations are just a part of it, and mostly they are in line with also the 178 European recommendations that we have seen. We have 49 recommendations that have been reviewed in the new working groups in line with the 9 big topics what Ms. Brockmeier has talked about, and these were rather widely chosen topics. Obviously, the conference basically wanted to allow for any topic to be discussed. They didn't want to leave anything and any topic out. And obviously, right from the beginning, it was being said that we would like to have an open dialogue. But for those 800 European citizens, it has been a challenge. It has been a challenging task. And this is where I have to also say that this was greatly done. These 178 recommendations are astonishing, considering the fact that some of these topics were very wide. And the citizens component plus the national representatives and the president of the Youth Forum, they all said that the European citizens' dialogues were a clear success. They were very well moderated, hosted. The citizens had the feeling that they were being accompanied very well by the experts, and therefore it was possible to not only touch the surface of these topics, but to actually go into depth. The working groups. This is where I do have to remark some negative aspects. These 178 recommendations were only available relatively late. This wasn't possible otherwise. They were needed to be discussed as well. This is why we, in the beginning, just met and we were trying to find our role in the process, so that at some point we actually started working once the recommendations were available. And then we can say that the process started. The process of transposing these European citizens' recommendations and the national recommendations through common work in the working groups into clear recommendations. And this is the interesting part. From tomorrow and on Saturday will be handed over to the 3 presidents of the institutions. And this is where we have to clearly say what Ms. Puttrich has also mentioned and Ms. Brockmeier. Here we can see the weaknesses, the structural weaknesses that we have seen from the very beginning in the conference. This means that obviously we focus on a number of things. We have a feedback mechanism. Obviously, we shouldn't just leave it with these recommendations, but with a plenary debate, we should be able to say that we actually have common recommendations. And common obviously means that we do have to come to some kind of consensus. And this is why this upcoming weekend is so important, and where we are actually at a time of crisis in the event, in order to use the term for this event. The big question is the conference going to keep its promises that it gave to citizens being involved in the process? And this is why I can only say that we are very excited to see about what is going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow we are going to have a number of meetings in the so-called 4 components. First of all, the citizens component that I am a part of, the component of the European Parliament, the Commission members, and also the national members of parliament. And this is where we are going to talk about the trends of the latest recommendations. And tomorrow at 4 in the afternoon, there will be a large plenary debate where a consensus should be achieved. And this is where we will have to see. We can now see that we are not going to be able to vote. and there won't be any specific positionings from governments. Some member states have actually said that they don't want to do that. There has been a non-paper from the Swedish government telling us that they cannot actually discuss the recommendations. This actually happened rather late in the process. We should have known at the beginning that this might happen at some point. We will see what is going to happen tomorrow, and we are very excited about what is going to happen tomorrow, the final decision. Has this been a success or not? This is yet to be seen, but I am confident that at the end of the day, we are going to achieve a lot more than the strongest critics of the conference could have imagined at the beginning, and therefore I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Vielen Dank für diesen Einblick, Frau Hartung.
Thank you very much for all this. I would have two questions, because you were saying tomorrow at 4 p.m. Do you have the impression that outside of the bubble of Brussels, of those who are really fond of the European Union, do you think everybody else is knowing that there is something happening on this day? You say no. And what would be interesting if you can say that shortly, the pandemic as a crisis, the work of, how did that change the Conference of Europe? Because I thought, okay, Dubrovnik, we should start start with this exchange with the people, and who could be near to the whole thing. And what else did influence all this conference? Well, the media, obviously, the whole conference. Why? I can say it in my work, the European participation is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's hard work, and obviously get out of the blue bubble. Well, you need to keep up. Ms. Puttrich said it beforehand. Whatever comes out of it, we have to stick to it, because it's very important, and we would have loved to have more attention, but I can imagine that the whole complexity of this is difficult now. Tell me in 3 sentences what we are talking about. And this is very difficult. These topics are not really sexy. And this was said, and there's anyhow a lot of things inside. We are going ahead. And yes, we will see if we might interest. Now, the corona pandemic, we had this process for 2 years. We then had 1 year. We were 1 year late. We can't hear the lady. She obviously switched off the microphone. Can the lady please open the microphone? Nein.
Knopf gekommen? Nein. Okay, ich höre, dass irgendetwas, das ist auf Ihrer Seite womöglich das Problem.
Yeah, that's post-pandemic. Unfortunately, it seems it does not work, and we can't hear you. I will try to talk to the professor, and probably then we can come back to you.
I want to bring in your thoughts. As I said in the beginning, you're Italian, but you teach in Brussels, you're connected to your university in Portugal, you're just like one of the global citizens, as so many are here in Brussels. When you look at the media coverage in the several countries that you follow, the Conference of Europe, has it been an issue or not? Or was it just something that you talked about with your friends in the bubble?
Well, my perception is that has never been a priority in the media, and that's understandable because we've been through quite intense events over the last 3 years now. There have been moments in which some more attention has been gained in different countries from the south, the center, and the north of Europe. But my impression is that specific publics, specific interests have been followed what was happening with the conference, while other parts of the public have almost never engaged with the information, the flow of the news concerning the conference.
Yeah, something very unique and interesting, I think, as an experiment, as the minister has said in the conference on the future of Europe, was this multilingual digital platform that had been developed, so it was possible in 24 languages to contribute, to discuss with translation, to organize events. Yeah, kind of like a magic tool. I'm sure you followed what was happening there and how it worked. What is your assessment on this multilingual digital platform? Is it good? Should it be kept online, or yeah?
Well, let me answer your question for what I could hear from of course, the English translation. But I heard 2 words that I was expecting, and 1 word that I didn't hear from the other speakers that I think should be included in our assessment of the platform in general. So the 2 words that I've heard are experiment, and the other one is challenge. And I think these 2 words describe pretty much the good part, the success so far, and the problems that describe the conference. The real word that I couldn't find is complexity. So if we look at the platform, the design of the platform, this platform is designed as any digital tool, and digital tools for commercial use give us a very high expectation on quick delivery of services and extreme simplicity, right? Well, when you look at democratic processes, no matter if these are happening offline or online, these are complex processes. They take time, they cost money, they are challenging, and they have no guarantees about the success. And I felt there was no communication with this digital tool that it will remain a complex process to engage hundreds of millions of citizens in Europe deciding what Europe should be doing. So this idea of complexity, I think, should be included in our way of understanding and storytelling the next conference or the next idea. Otherwise, this will be another fantastic experiment like the European Citizens Initiative, which is still ongoing, but it was sold to the people as this is the new way that you can say the Commission what the Commission should be doing, and the results have been quite different from that, again because of lack of complexity in the understanding of people.
Yeah, I think a little bit of a point that's very important that Sarah Brockmeier stressed in her keynote about this expectation management, level of expectation, because of course there's always the risk of under-delivering, and then those who participate or follow closely, they are disappointed, and then they might move away from it. And you yourself have also been working on another kind of like digital project on a European level called ProDemo. Could you describe a little bit just like what was the idea and how it worked, and if there's something to be learned from there?
Well, in this moment there are 15 million Europeans, so people that were born in one of the 27 member states, that are living and working in another EU member state. Well, Brussels is one typical example, right? Now, if you look at Brussels, I lived in Brussels, I worked in Brussels for 6 years, and I have to say, and I'm pretty ashamed to say this, I never really got interested in local politics, in spite of Belgium being one of the countries that is more open to foreigners to participate in political life. So there is a problem of participation, and this is the idea of Prodemo. Prodemo, that just concluded 2 months ago, was a project about creating a mobile app. You can find it on all the stores from the different companies, a mobile app that is called Prodemo. And this mobile app was is meant to have information for EU mobile citizens to make them more engaged. Now, I think it was a visionary project. I think it helped us to understand a lot of things. One thing that we understood, that I see also in the conference, is that at the end of the day, we had the inclusion of pretty much the same people that would have been included otherwise, and not the other mobile citizens that we were willing to reach out, and until now we didn't.
Okay, and I think now we can connect to the virtual guest as well. But one other question I would be interested. Of course, there's also this question of just like legitimacy. Just like now, of course, we have this Conference of Europe. We have 800 citizens that were selected to take part. And what are your thoughts about just like how does it fit in the idea of national representative democracy? We have European Parliament. Just like is it a one-off where we can just like we get an input and then we work for the next couple of years? Could it be constant, or is it just like a risky thing to do such an experiment? Because of course you could I think easily challenge the legitimacy of such a small size of 800 people that come up with proposals that could change EU treaties in the end.
So in principle, I am not a big fan of this idea of the mini publics as they are described in academic studies. So the idea that you can create in a lab the diversity of a population by selecting randomly according to a certain criteria, it gives, I think the speaker before me described it very well. We have proof that some interests were overrepresented and other interests were not represented. Now, so in principle, this is not necessarily what I would insist on doing. However, I would replicate the experiment with that complexity alongside it. So as far as it is an experiment and it's meant to mobilize the public opinion and make more citizens listening about what Europe is doing, what they could say to Europe, this is definitely a good practice that should be replicated in next years.
Okay. Versuchen wir mal, ob wir noch mal zuschalten können. Frau Hartung.
Now let's try if we can have Mrs. Hartung once again. Yes, it does work. Perfect. So we are together once again on the virtual part. You were talking about the fact that the topic wasn't sexy, but then you wanted to add what should be done. I would say the pandemic did cost us a whole year, and I was part of these who wanted more time. We do need 2 years. Just now I see it differently because I see how important it is to keep the whole thing interesting, because for the citizens it was really difficult. We are talking about days off and of citizens who lost their job because they come from Bulgaria, and somebody said they would talk about European topics, and therefore I would say we do have an interesting group of these people, and this is not the blue bubble we normally have, and probably 1 year is something that we can expect, and I can lift with it, even if now we have to really speed up. This sometimes has important questions. We have a follow-up process. How are things going further? And this is very important, and will decide if this will be a success or not. Very good. And now I would like to have a question to all three of you. And Ms. Brockmeier, please, you are the first one. In my experience, a very important point were the days after the elections in Europe, and we had this important candidate, and then Mrs. von der Leyen popped up, and the conference of the future is something that she brought in, and Mr. Macron did like. And if we read it, then we are going to see the lists, and this is a double question. This can we connect it for the people that will vote here, or is there something that has been forgotten? And is this something that is important for you? This is an EU identity. How important is this? I think that the candidate is right, but if this important for the conference, maybe Mrs. Hartung can say something about it. But I would like to underline that this is the problem, that the motivation for the organization of the conference is made out from very important approaches. And therefore, obviously also the parliament has been so complex. This as far as what we have heard up to now. I found it difficult, and now I'm really working on this topic, and I had difficulties in the last few years really to understand the whole process. And if somebody who is not doing research, that will be even harder. Now, if you want to try to have more legitimacy and confidence, then we need something more slender. Now, the candidate was an important part in the discussions. I can't tell you because I didn't participate myself, but the topic is a very important part. Now, if we look at the other 26 countries, they do not even know what we are talking about. For us, this is very important because we had this one candidate and then became another president of the commission. This was a topic not with the attention we have in Europe, or better said, in Germany.
Really a German word, but a German obsession or something that Germans are particularly interested in?
I would say EU obsession, but yeah, I'm in the word doesn't help. It's a now-sounding word, but difficult to pronounce, at least for an Italian. And I don't think that people were really ever worried about how the process of the Spitzenkandidat could end up. Because there are other topics a little bit broader that you should use when you want to engage such a broad population. So either you go very broad or you go super local. That is what works normally with participatory procedures.
Which would be a topic that you would have suggested, or where you think is it foreign policy, as Dr. Kroll has mentioned? I think, of course, now we're in a huge crisis, or like this Zeitenwende has happened, and I think also when looking at the recommendations, of course, there's a lot about foreign policy to strengthen the role of the High Representative is one of that. Also to abolish anonymity about certain things. Do you think that's an issue that could be more interesting to A, see improvement, and B, get people interested and see results?
Yeah, absolutely. I was invited myself to be a facilitator, an expert in 2 panels, so I could follow the discussion. And there were very practical topics. One was about taxation of big companies, for example. Another one was about giving voting rights to citizens below 16 years old, or between 16 and 18 years old. And I would say with this, normally these kind of topics that touch specific aspects of our lives are very well received by people. People got really engaged, very passionate. So there's plenty of topics that could be discussed that are not necessarily concerned with how the bureaucracy express itself in nominating and appointing its hierarchies.
Yeah, yeah. Is that something, möchten Sie da noch was dazu sagen? Aus der Zoom-Welt, quasi jetzt hat Außenpolitik da nochmal eine größere...
Would you like to say something about this because you are making research? Do you have the impression that the attack on the Ukraine has become more important? It's difficult, I guess, that there is a high interest, but there are more questions and not a participation instead. We have to distinguish in Germany. If you want to explain as a commission, a parliament, or whatsoever, then you do need other formats and you need a clear communication instead of having inputs for politics. And I think for this participation, where you want to have a recommendation, we have seen this in Germany itself, then you need talk about these topics, and you have to go into detail, or you put it on local contexts, because you want also to reach out to more people. And obviously, I will not say that we should not do these dialogues for the external policy. For a successful dialogue, we should have a national or regional level these dialogues, that we should think how you can connect them. And this has not been very successful in the conference, because we could have put things together. There were only parallelities, and I hope that this might come together. And then we had the European level, and we should have more interest here for all this, with a learning effect, and where they do know better how to do this. And this is something we should keep in mind. Well, time is running, and this week we already have heard that the European Parliament might go back to Article 48 of the treaty in order to have possibilities, and the council has to decide. We are talking about the real convention. Maybe in order to make it smaller, would this be that you consider as being positive? And is this realistic before many member states are skeptical, and that they would say, we have so many crises, so we have so many things to do, we do not need such a convention? I would like to ask Mrs. Hartung to start, and then we talk once again with the professor. This is something that is covering also my interests, and obviously would like to have a participation of the members in these procedures. But you have to see if we are considering the context. Obviously, this is important, and we have a lot in this different recommendations and proposals, and it would be said if we are only considering a few of them, leaving the others out. And I'm also thinking that this is a momentum, and as we don't have a good follow-up process in order to do this all the time, we should see both. We do have a lot of recommendations. Many things can be realized quickly, and I would also say who wants to be in policy should be part of this discussion, and there are people who want to go ahead, and this should be something serious, and we should not insist on several points, but this convention is not too realistic. We would need 14 plus member states that are backing this, and with what we see right now with the election in 2024, there might be some space for doing something. Well, it's difficult to answer because I think it's necessary. On the other hand, from a political point of view, it's not very realistic. And we have the danger that we promise something without being able to deliver. And this is something important in the member states in order to really decide what is important in the whole context.
I think we are half and a half. I can tell you that what happened in France with the participatory process that President Macron started after the Gilets jaunes was a great momentum, and then after not delivering what citizens had suggested, there was some critique. So the missing concrete outcome can turn out to be a problem, and there's a chance that will happen. But I will bring a positive note. In 2011, I was working in the cabinet of the Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Monti, and we started a process called Dialogue with Citizens, which we ask citizens, can you tell us, for example, how to cut public expenses in order to save money? And obviously, there was no concrete outcome, but it was very successful in terms of gaining trust from Italians that say, oh, finally we have a chance to say our opinions. So the process can be, for the moment, the successful outcome.
Ja. Das ist auch etwas, was ich in einigen Gesprächen auch immer mal gehört habe.
This is something that I heard very often. If Mrs. Hartung said, when you talk about these topics, and we want more integration, more competencies for Brussels. But I already heard that all this is very well done, but which competency should be given to another part? Generally, whoever is participating, well, this might be stronger because you decide and discuss what you are thinking. Now, Mrs. Hartung, we don't have a lot of time. I already say thank you to the other two, and Mrs. Hartung, you might have the opportunity for a last word. I only can say what you said. I guess we should not see it as what that because the citizens want to be considered, and they are considering what they are doing. And what the professor said, we have on the one hand the big level, and this was the conference for the future of Europe, but we need also a local momentum. Go where the people are, participate. If you want to do this outside the blue bubble, needs to be near to the citizen. We have to fight for both of them, and if we get such a convent in Brussels, then we will have big questions, and all countries have to participate, and therefore we have to go where the people are, and this is a marathon, and we need a good condition. I hope we will all participate. I hope your colleagues, this is now the moment for a broad approach, and we hope that we get the resonance we need. Yeah, because on the 9th of May, we will have an event in Strasbourg where the presidents from the European Union will say something. And Mr. Macron, I guess already the next days will be very interesting. And I would like to say thank you to all of you and all of those who followed us. I hope we didn't promise too much. We had a lot of important questions and discussed them. And I just wish you a lovely day. And the next crisis talk is on the 29th of June, reform of and see you soon in the representation of Hessen.